Family reunion. The late afternoon sun scattered golden light over the vast terraces of the Harrington estate. The house, if anyone could call a 5-bedroom, 3-story mansion a house, stood proudly atop a manicured hill, defiant against the encroaching cityscape of Los Angeles that shimmered in the distance. To outsiders, the Harringtons looked like a portrait of American success. To those within, it felt more like a carefully staged play where each character rehearsed lines they wished were true. As the black town car rolled up the sweeping driveway, Daniel Harrington pressed his palm against the window, gazing at the place he used to call home. The gate was freshly painted, the lawn sculpted down to the last blade of grass. Nothing seemed to have changed, and yet Daniel was certain everything had. 4 years in London, first for his MBA, later for the lucrative tech investment job, had changed the way he saw the world. The family business had once been his birthright, a legacy built by his father's iron will and his mother's patience. Now, returning at his father's invitation, Daniel felt like an outsider assigned a starring role in a drama he hadn't agreed to. As he stepped out, the air vibrated with the murmur of summer. Maria, and he would never bring himself to call her mother to her face, stood in the foyer, graceful even in the simple pale blue dress she'd worn for their rare family occasions. Her embrace was warm, her words measured. "Daniel, you look older. In a good way," she said, studying his face. "Welcome home." His father's voice boomed from the hallway.
"We thought you'd miss dinner, son. You know your brother's punctual about these things."
Charles Harrington appeared, larger than life as always, a glass of whiskey in one hand, eyes sharp and calculating. Daniel forced a smile, unsure if he was entering a family reunion or a boardroom negotiation. Inside, Evan, his younger brother, awaited, leaning against the marble-top kitchen island, phone in hand. Their handshake was firm but brief, the embrace more perfunctory than affectionate. Daniel noticed his brother's expensive watch, the careful tailoring of his suit. Their eyes met, and Daniel saw, behind the smile, a flicker of something younger brothers only showed to those who really. Peace sat untouched on Daniel's plate. His father finally broke the silence.
"We have a lot to discuss, Daniel. Tomorrow, I want you in the office. We need your expertise if we're going to hold this company together."
Daniel nodded, the words heavy in his chest. The family reunion, he realized, was a prelude, the first act in the play of ambition, loyalty, and betrayal. And as the city lights winked outside the tall windows, Daniel wondered if any of them were truly ready for the next chapter. Final test. The next morning. The Harrington and Company headquarters gleamed beneath the Southern California sun. Daniel arrived early, stepping out of the elevator on the 23rd floor. He was greeted not with warmth, but with perfunctory nods from employees, most of whom he recognized, a few he didn't. He wondered how much had changed in the years he'd been gone. The office, minimalist and expensive, boasted glass walls, polished stone floors, and abstract art that announced more about wealth than taste. Through the glass, Daniel saw his father already in the boardroom, discussing something in low tones with Evan. Daniel's heart thudded in his chest, unsettled by the quick, closed-door huddle. He found his own office, his name still printed in small letters on the frosted glass. Old photographs remained on the shelves, Daniel and Evan as children, standing with their mother in Yosemite, the brothers with Charles at a groundbreaking ceremony, Mariah's handwritten birthday card. "Dream big, Danny." It was all a carefully curated illusion of harmony and progress. Shortly after, the first meeting commenced. His father was crisp, efficient, and bordering on dismissive as he reviewed quarterly reports.
"We need to tighten operations,"
Charles barked.
"Margins are down 5%. Daniel, I expect you'll have recommendations by Friday."
Evan slid a folder across the table.
"Just some preliminary analyses, brother."
Daniel caught a subtle smirk as he flipped through the file. Half the numbers didn't add up, and the recommended course of action seemed tailor-made to benefit Evan's new portfolio division. Their eyes met for a tense second, and Daniel forced a polite nod.
After the meeting, Daniel strolled the executive floor, watching people hush their conversations when he passed. In the finance department, he
Cover. When he asked the CFO, he received a vague, almost wary response. These arrangements were approved at the highest level, Daniel. In the executive lounge, Daniel tried to confront Evan.
These numbers aren't making sense,
Daniel said quietly. Evan's reply was cool, almost rehearsed. Dad trusts me to handle things while you were away. Maybe you should focus on reacclimating instead of judging the system from day one. The day ended with another closed-door meeting. This time Daniel wasn't invited. He watched through the glass as his father and brother spoke quietly, the air between them tense and conspiratorial. Daniel was beginning to sense the contours of a plan being shaped in shadows. Driving home beneath the deepening pink sky, Daniel felt the weight of the day pressing around his chest. His family's empire was no longer a place of belonging. The company, like the house, was full of secrets, and Daniel was starting to realize that if he wanted to survive, he'd have to uncover them, one by one. Daniel sat in his office long after sunset, the city's neon glow reflecting off the glass-paneled walls. Alone, he worked through line after line of accounts, compelled by a gnawing sense that something was fundamentally wrong. The whispers in the office, Evan's smug assurance, his father's brisk impatience, all of it clung to him like a cold draft. He was so deep into the numbers that he barely noticed the time until a sharp rap sounded on his door. Erin, the company's legal counsel, poked her head in, eyes flicking nervously down the hallway. "Your father's asked for you in the boardroom, Mr. Harrington. Right away." A surge of apprehension tightened his chest as he gathered his things and made his way to the boardroom. As soon as he entered, the tension hit him like a slap. The entire board was there. His father sat at the head of the table, stony-faced. Evan was beside him, an unreadable expression fixing his lips into a straight line. "Daniel," Charles began, voice slicing the silence, "I'm afraid this isn't a routine meeting." Evan's voice of moderation. The board members avoided his gaze, one after another, offering ambiguous looks of regret. Daniel's world tilted as he realized the depth of the scheme. Evan leaned in. "For the sake of the company and our family, I hope you'll step aside quietly." The room seemed to swim as Daniel stood. Outside the glass, the city thundered on, indifferent. He gathered what little dignity remained and straightened his jacket. "My conscience is clear," he said, voice trembling but unbroken. "But I warn you, lies have a way of surfacing." He walked out of the boardroom to the shocked silence of the senior staff, people who wouldn't meet his eyes. The humiliation bit deeper than anything he'd imagined. Alone, in the vast empty parking garage, Daniel pressed his fists against the steering wheel, grief and disbelief turning slowly, inexorably, into anger. As he glanced one last time at the flickering lights atop the family headquarters, he understood. Everything he'd trusted had collapsed. But something else smoldered beneath the ruins. A resolve he hadn't felt in years. Whatever it took, he would uncover the truth. And when he did, the consequences would echo through every marble corridor of the empire that had cast him out. The fall into despair. For days, Daniel moved as if underwater, each errand, each phone call, each breath feeling thick and distorted. The world, once clear and full of possibility, was now filtered through a gray lens. He watched the news anchors on television matter-of-factly summarize the financial irregularities and his indefinite suspension. The story replayed in polite, sanitized language. The weight of the scandal anchored itself in his chest, heavy and cold. His phone buzzed ceaselessly that first day, then slowed by the next. Texts from old colleagues, first expressing shock, then confusion, then polite distance, trickled to nothing. Many messages went unanswered. Daniel deleted none of them but stopped checking altogether. On the third night, Daniel sat at the edge of his childhood bed, surrounded by relics of a simpler, brighter past. Late-night strategy sessions in the kitchen. If any of those moments had been true, Daniel could no longer recognize them. He left the house at dawn, wandering empty streets and silent parks. In one shaded corner of MacArthur Park, he sat on a bench, watching sleeper buses lumber by, headlights flickering in the half-darkness. The defeat clung to him, stubborn as dew. A week passed. Daniel researched attorneys, but each firm returned calls with rehearsed apologies. "It's a conflict of interest, Mr. Harrington. I'm afraid we're unable to take your case at this time." He felt his world shrink. Old friends unavailable, business contacts hesitant, even family friends distancing themselves as if his guilt might be contagious. Late one evening, Daniel stood before the vast windows of his apartment, looking out over the city that had once felt like home. He stared at his own reflection, a drawn face, sleepless eyes. He felt stripped of everything that had once defined him, his place in the family, the promise of legacy, respect. Yet as the night deepened, something inside Daniel refused to break. Beneath the grief, a dormant fire smoldered. Pride, indignation, a stubborn refusal to accept defeat. His despair was real, but it could not be final. Though battered, Daniel's spirit clung to a truth he'd learned from his years in both family and business. Nothing is ever as permanent as it seems, and no story ends until someone decides to quit telling it. And Daniel Harrington, even in his darkest hour, was far from done. The spark of revenge. The days faded into one another, slow and formless. As Daniel drifted through the motions of existence, he became a ghost in his own life, shopping in the early dawn when grocery stores were empty, slipping into 24-hour laundromats and waiting for the crowds to thin before claiming a machine. If guilt clung to him in public, suspicion wore him down in private. What finally broke the cycle was a knock at the door, sharp and persistent, one rainy afternoon. Daniel hesitated before opening it, half expecting a process server or another reporter sniffing for a quote. Instead, he found himself face to face with Mark Sullivan. Mark, once his roommate at Stanford, now a wiry man wearing a battered Dodgers cap, stepped in with the movie before, just not with your family's budget. Daniel looked away. Maybe, but unless the truth shows itself, I'm just another guilty man in the headlines. "That's the thing," Mark said, leaning forward. "You don't sit around waiting for the truth to show up. You drag it into daylight." A slow, unfamiliar current stirred inside Daniel. He remembered late nights as a teenager, huddled with Mark and friends, plotting elaborate pranks or hacking the school's grade database, not to cheat, but just to see if they could. Back then, obstacles had been puzzles rather than walls. Somewhere along the way, he'd forgotten that rush. Mark grinned, as if sensing Daniel's thoughts. "This isn't a tragedy, it's a challenge. You're smarter than both of them. You just have to prove it." Daniel spent the next morning poring over everything, bank statements, emails, contracts. He looked for patterns, holes in the narrative, any trace of a digital fingerprint. His anger honed into focus. The more he studied the evidence against him, the more convinced he became of his innocence and of the scope of the betrayal. He started small, tracing login records, calling old contacts in IT for advice under the pretense of curiosity. Each denial from a former colleague only fueled his determination. Sleepless nights returned, but their edge had changed. Where despair once pressed down, now a stubborn spark urged him on. In quiet moments, Daniel repeated the words to himself. Drag the truth into daylight. The phrase became a mantra, echoing in his mind each time exhaustion threatened to pull him under. He sent out queries, befriended a forensic accountant, hunted for inconsistencies in the audit trail. Bit by bit, he built a map, a tangled web of backdated transactions, alternate email accounts, whispered conversations between trusted subordinates. And for the first time since the fall, Daniel sensed something new. Momentum. He wasn't out of the shadows yet, but at last, fueled by friendship, rage, and the old Harrington pride, Daniel was ready to fight back. Gathering allies. Daniel's apartment slowly transformed from a sanctuary of despair into a— "You want my help?" she asked when he finished, stirring sugar into her coffee. "You realize if they find out I'm out too. Blacklisted." Daniel nodded, nerves firing. "I wouldn't ask if I weren't desperate. I know it's risky, Sylvia, but I need someone who understands the structure from the inside." A slow smile crept across her face. "Good. I was starting to get bored over there anyway." Together, they retraced the digital fingerprints Daniel had discovered. Sylvia's intuition for company politics filled gaps he missed. She highlighted emails that didn't quite sound like Evan and pointed out routine reports that had disappeared quietly from the shared drives. Soon, another ally joined the cause. Javier Martinez, a forensic IT specialist Sylvia trusted from past collaborations, agreed to consult in secret. He was younger than Daniel remembered, with sharp eyes and nimble fingers always drumming against the table. He set up encrypted drives and began reconstructing deleted files, speaking in quick bursts of technical jargon that Daniel, with his business background, struggled to follow but quickly learned to trust. The research became a group obsession. Sylvia and Javier joined Daniel in the apartment on weekends, hiding research materials in nondescript folders marked vacation photos and grocery list. Nights bled into mornings as coffee and adrenaline blurred the hours. They uncovered odd temporal gaps in the server logs and a shadow employee profile that had quietly approved nearly all the suspect transactions. What at first seemed random now fit an elaborate pattern of gradual manipulation, implicating not only Evan, but a small network of executives loyal to him. Every discovery made the team both more anxious and more resolute. One night after Javier cracked into a hidden folder, an explosive memory file emerged, a voice recording of Evan late at night, muttering directions about the London fallback plan. Make sure Daniel's credentials are fresh on those documents before the board meets. The three stared at each other, the weight of the evidence settling between them. "This is it," Daniel breathed. "Proof." Javier nodded. "It'll stand up, but we need more. Enough to connect Evan directly to the money and to his network, so no one can and drive." The fear never quite left. Javier's car was tailed one night, and Sylvia reported her apartment being searched. But under that fear burned a new certainty. Whatever came next, Daniel was no longer alone. And as their map of secrets grew, so did the hope that the truth, once dragged into the light, might just have the power to set everything right. The tipping point. The city was roaring outside, but Daniel and his allies hardly noticed. Night spilled over Los Angeles as the team clustered in Daniel's apartment, the soft taps of keyboards and anxious whispers filling the tight quarters. The air crackled with tension. Every new document, every snippet of code brought them closer to either salvation or disaster. It was Sylvia who finally connected the last crucial dots. Bent over Daniel's kitchen table, she poured through a year's worth of internal memos, most dull, some unfinished, a few strangely misdated. She stopped abruptly, then beckoned Javier and Daniel over. "Look at this." These two memos are identical, except this one was sent to legal, and this was sent to the board 3 weeks later, with Evan's edits in his usual style. But the numbers don't match. Javier raised his brows. A deliberate paper trail? Or a cleanup job gone wrong? Does it even matter? Daniel whispered, eyes scanning both pages. If we show this to the right person, they'll start asking the right questions. But the decision of when and how to go public was fraught. With every hour that passed, Daniel's sense of urgency grew. Sylvia's sources within the company reported that Evan was pushing for a final settlement with the board, a move that would cement his rise and permanently sully Daniel's reputation. The window to act was closing by the minute. The breakthrough came via a single, cryptic message from the former board member Daniel had persuaded into helping weeks earlier. Tonight, Richard's bar. Trust no one. Bring copies, not originals. It felt like a scene from a spy movie, but Daniel didn't hesitate. Loaded with USB drives and printouts, he headed downtown, his heart pounding with adrenaline and nerves. Mark offered to wait outside, just in case things went wrong. Inside the dimly lit bar, Daniel found the former board member, Audrey Lynn, crisp and composed as ever, a woman who had once been a mentor. Resolve. He'd always wanted justice, but hadn't imagined it costing his family everything, even the parts worth saving. And if I don't act? Daniel asked, the question feeling heavier than the words themselves. Audrey didn't blink. Then you become a casualty. And your brother goes unchecked. You know the stakes. Only you can decide what's worth burning down. Daniel sat back, wrestling with the enormity of the moment. For years, he'd watched his family's empire rise and shimmer like a glass tower above the city. The scandals, the sacrifices, the betrayals, they were all bricks in that foundation. Now, for the first time, he had the power to strike at its very core. He remembered the faces of Sylvia, Javier, and Mark, people who'd risked for him, believed in the possibility of truth. He thought of his mother, his own name in the news, his father's silence. He realized finally that justice meant more than vengeance. It meant the chance to end the cycle, whatever the cost. Daniel nodded, the decision burning bittersweet in his chest. Do it, he said quietly. Blow it open. I'll take what comes. Audrey smiled, a sad, proud smile. It won't be easy, Daniel. But sometimes the family you choose is the only one that's real. As Daniel stepped back into the night, past Mark in the idling car, he felt changed, not victorious, not even relieved, but resolute. The next hours would reshape the world he'd inherited, and everything he'd known about loyalty, power, and what it truly meant to own your name. The tipping point had come, and ready or not, Daniel had chosen his side. The fallout. The news broke at dawn. It started as a whisper, a short blog post on the Legal Insider Forum, then a cryptic tweet from a downtown reporter. By noon, the story exploded across headlines, radio chatter, and news tickers scrolling above Wilshire Boulevard. Scandal rocks Harrington and Co. Corporate fraud allegations shake LA elite. Daniel watched it unfold in real time. He sat at the kitchen table with Mark, damp palms pressed against his collar, and the news cycle began to devour the details. An unexpected sense of calm settled over him. He had no illusions about what came next. His phone buzzed with calls and texts, some vile, some admiring, many simply desperate for answers. He ignored most, but when Sylvia called, he answered. "We did it," she said. "Just caught the company's internal memo. Full investigation, Evan and 3 others placed on leave. There's panic in the halls." Javier chimed in on group chat with grainy cell phone photos. Evan, stone-faced, flanked by men in dark suits as he left the Harrington Tower. Javier's caption read, Looks like karma wears a badge. At home, Daniel's mother finally called. Her voice trembled with sorrow and the exhaustion of too many sleepless nights. Whatever happens now, remember you did what was right. Sometimes that's all you can do. Daniel closed his eyes, forcing himself not to break down. He'd learned over these desperate weeks that victory carried its own burdens. Many innocent colleagues were caught in the storm, and the Harrington name, once synonymous with trust, was now a punchline on late-night talk shows. As the federal subpoenas and lawsuits piled up, Daniel received his own summons to testify and clear his name. He faced the board and the authorities with the same resolve that had guided him through every sleepless night: honesty, sorrow, and no interest in revenge beyond the truth. For weeks, the investigation dominated the city's attention. Daniel's exoneration was not greeted with celebration, but with cautious respect. Some even speculated he had planned it all along. Soon the media glare shifted to the sentencing of Evan and his co-conspirators. The company, battered but unbroken, began the painful process of rebuilding under a new CEO chosen by the reformed board, someone outside the family for the first time. It wasn't the ending Daniel had dreamed of as a boy, looking up at the glittering company tower with his father's hand on his shoulder. But it was a real ending, and perhaps a true beginning. In the aftermath, Daniel found a strange sense of freedom. The future stretched wide and uncertain. Daniel could remember. His days were no longer consumed by crisis control or the dread of looming scandal. Instead, each morning greeted him with the unfamiliar luxury of choice. He rented a small studio on the east side, a world apart from the glass penthouse where he once lived. The new place was flooded with sunlight, the windows streaked with the fingerprints of former tenants, the floors creaking in the quiet. Daniel loved it immediately. He found peace in simplicity, in the ritual of making coffee, of organizing his scattered boxes, of washing dishes with his own hands. Sometimes he'd catch himself smiling at nothing in particular, a glimmer of hope cutting through the fatigue that still lingered deep in his bones. Word of the trial's resolution spread quickly through the city's boardrooms and cocktail lounges. Daniel Harrington, cleared of all charges, had chosen not to return to Harrington & Co. Instead, he remained mostly invisible, watching as the company he'd grown up inside tried to piece itself together without him. There were rumors of aggressive new leadership, of boardroom wars, of asset sales and buyouts. Occasionally, former colleagues reached out and, over coffee or cautious emails, apologized for their silence during his ordeal. Daniel bore them no grudge. He understood, now more than ever, how fear could strangle loyalty. With the old world fading in the distance, Daniel began searching for purpose in the new. He attended a handful of city council meetings, quietly observing the machinery of local government. He volunteered evenings at a legal aid center, using his skills to help small businesses and families navigate the bureaucracy that had once worked so efficiently against him. It was at the legal aid center that Daniel met Lena Brooks, a sharp, acerbic attorney with an untamed mane of red hair and a laugh that seemed to cut through even the bleakest days. She volunteered twice a week, and, after a few awkward conversations, she invited him out for coffee. "What are you going to do next?" she asked him one chilly night, steam rising from their mugs in the old brick cafe. He paused, surprised at how much the question mattered now. Laughter echoing off the exposed brick as they debated name tags and argued over whose turn it was to buy lunch. Slowly, clients arrived. There were false starts, Endless paperwork, late nights that bled into morning, but beneath it all was a fierce, defiant sense of purpose. They weren't building an empire. They were building something to be proud of. One late afternoon, Daniel stood by his window as the sun slid behind the city, bathing the streets in gold. Mark texted asking for dinner plans. Lena sent an article about corporate governance, annotated with fierce red underlines. Sylvia called out from the kitchen, asking if they had any more coffee. For the first time in years, Daniel didn't hesitate. He didn't glance back or wonder what he'd lost. He only looked ahead, heart beating steadily above new foundations. He was home, not in a glass tower, but in the world he was finally choosing for himself. A place built on truth, on friendship, and on the kind of future that no scandal could ever destroy. A different legacy. Spring arrived in Los Angeles with a fierceness, painting the city in bursts of jacaranda purple and washing the air with the promise of new beginnings. Daniel felt the change not only around him, the longer days, the restless energy of people on the move, but deep within himself. It was as if the world was finally catching up with the quiet hope that had been growing inside him all winter. Business at Honest Foundations was steady, if not spectacular. Daniel, Sylvia, Javier, and Lena worked together with relentless honesty, helping struggling entrepreneurs decipher contracts, mediating between touchy partners, and offering the kind of guidance that Daniel once wished he'd had. Their office routine, once chaotic, now pulsed with rhythm and familiarity. Shared bagels in the morning, client meetings scattered through the day, and brainstorming sessions that often spilled onto the small rooftop at sunset. Clients came and went, each with stories of ambition, anxiety, and the weight of responsibility. It was humbling, sometimes frustrating, but always meaningful. Daniel felt himself invested in their successes and failures in a way the old corporate world had never inspired. There were losses, and occasionally, the reminders of his family's name, once revered, now spoke. Nothing was asked of him, but a door, awkward, tentative, was left ajar. Daniel read it twice, emotions uncoiling in slow waves. That night, over Chinese takeout in the office, he shared the letter with his friends. Sylvia squeezed his hand. Javier cracked a joke about the Harrington men finally learning to say what they meant. And Lena, ever practical, reminded him, "Closure's not a door you walk through. It's a house you build one room at a time." In the months that followed, Daniel made small attempts to rebuild. Not his reputation, but his relationships. He visited his mother on Sundays, cooking dinner in her quiet house and letting her fuss over his haircut and his choice in shoes. He wrote a careful, honest reply to his father. With Evan, it was harder. The calls started awkward, raw, but Daniel found his anger softening, replaced by a quiet, complicated sadness. With Honest Foundations growing in both reputation and revenue, the team began mentoring recent college graduates looking to work with integrity. Daniel relished these mornings, new faces, fresh questions, the thrill of sharing hard-won wisdom. At last, he began to believe that failure was not something to hide from, but to share, piece by piece, until it became a map for others to follow. On the anniversary of the company's founding, the team celebrated with a rooftop dinner. Friends gathered, laughter rising into the dusk. Daniel looked around the table, Sylvia's quick wit, Javier's infectious optimism, Lena's fierce loyalty, each person a piece of the life he'd chosen, not inherited. He raised a glass, surprised to feel content rather than haunted, and made a toast, simple but true, to moving forward, to doing good, and to never forgetting the difference. As night settled and the new city lights glittered in the distance, Daniel felt the burden of legacy at last begin to shift. It wasn't about glass towers or the family name chiseled onto a building's stone facade. It was about the lives he touched, the trust he built, and the promises he kept in the small moments that no headline would ever cover. He was forging a different legacy, a quiet, honest one. And he knew, with unwavering certainty, the river before coffee and client calls. In the evenings, he met with local entrepreneurs, city council members, and sometimes even journalists. Always careful to focus on the future, never trading on the old Harrington name. One Thursday, a soft-spoken woman in her 60s came into their office. Her bakery, the same shop she'd run since her husband died, nestled between the hardware store and the neon-lit laundromat, was at risk from a predatory landlord. Like so many others, she'd tried to seek help but found herself mired in red tape and unanswered emails. Daniel listened quietly, then offered to take on her case. It was a modest battle, just one lease, one small storefront, but as he and Lena pored over the paperwork late into the night, Daniel realized these fights mattered. They were planting seeds, each small win a testament to the promise he'd made to himself a lifetime ago. Outside work, life kept surprising him. Javier brought in his homemade empanadas to share with the team, and his laughter filled the office even in the busiest stretches. Sylvia led weekend workshops in the community, helping high schoolers understand their rights and find their voices. Lena surprised Daniel one evening with tickets to a jazz show. Her idea of loosening him up, she claimed, though he suspected she just wanted to see him smile. As summer's heat climbed, Honest Foundations hosted its first open house for local small businesses. It was a modest affair, a folding table of snacks, a handful of flyers, and a standing room-only crowd in their tight office. Daniel looked around at the group, shop owners, students, longtime residents, young professionals. Each face filled him with hope. They all carried heavy stories, yes, but also boundless possibility. After the open house, Daniel lingered on the balcony as dusk spilled over the city. Lena joined him, pressing a cool glass of lemonade into his hand. "Did you ever imagine this?" she asked, nodding toward the chatter inside. Daniel shook his head, laughing quietly. "Not even in my wildest dreams. I thought, maybe, after everything, the steady, honest work ahead." With each choice, each act, they were sowing something new. Something that would outlast any building bearing his name. Daniel smiled, finally understanding that the truest legacies emerge in the small spaces. In laughter, in kindness, in the seeds of tomorrow. Full circle. Autumn. Swept into Los Angeles on a tide of golden leaves and clear blue skies. The city's restless rhythm neither hurried nor paused. But Daniel felt the change deep in his bones. Often, on cool mornings, he would pause on the stoop outside his building, mug of coffee in hand, and watch the city slowly come to life. Street vendors unpacking their carts, parents shepherding children to school, a gentle symphony of beginnings. Honest Foundations was busier than ever. The bakery whose lease they had fought for had since expanded, now serving pastries and strong coffee to students and city workers alike. Javier, ever the networker, had built a coalition of neighborhood businesses to lobby for fairer zoning laws. Sylvia was in talks to start a youth mentorship program, drawing on her own hard-won experiences. Lena had agreed to teach an ethics seminar at the university, much to everyone's pride, except her own, naturally. This season, Daniel realized, was one of harvest. The work they'd planted, each case taken, each risk endured, was bearing fruit in unexpected ways. But with growth came fresh challenges. They'd outgrown the original loft, and as the search for new office space began, so too did the pressure and uncertainty. Clients brought more complicated problems, and a few potential investors wanted expansion. If Daniel was willing to let them buy in, attach their names, perhaps even change the company's mission. For several nights, Daniel lay awake, replaying old fears. Would growth ruin what they'd built? Was this how it always happened? Ambition creeping in, quiet and persistent, until ideals gave way to the old, familiar hunger for power. Some nights, he almost called his father, whose letter now sat by his nightstand in a worn-on patience for impact over scale. It wasn't unanimous, but it was honest. By the end of the meeting, Daniel felt something settle inside him, a certainty he hadn't known in years. Later, as the sun dipped low and the team parted ways, Daniel found himself walking the familiar city blocks. He wandered to the old Harrington building, now with a different name on the facade, its hallways no longer echoing with his family's ambition. He stood on the sidewalk, watching professionals hurry in and out, no one glancing his way. He felt not pain, but gratitude. The past no longer defined him, nor did it cast the same long shadow. Heading home in the cool twilight, Daniel's phone buzzed, a message from his mother inviting him to dinner, a reminder of the bridges rebuilt. He smiled, slipping the phone into his pocket. As he reached his building and climbed the worn stairs, Daniel paused. The city glowed below him, each window a story, every street a possibility. At his door, the laughter of his friends already echoed from within, promising warmth, food, and the comfort of shared dreams. He realized then how far he'd traveled, from privilege to loss, from anger to peace, from a life dictated by others to one shaped by his own values. The circle, he understood, was not a return to where he'd started. It was the journey itself, winding, imperfect, unbroken. Inside, surrounded by his chosen family and the life he had built himself, Daniel allowed himself a rare moment of contentment. He was whole, and the future was wide open.